How do you incorporate both compound and isolation exercises to create a balanced workout? Let's talk about it.
Don't you want to look good naked?
When we're talking about incorporating different movements, whether that's compound or isolation, we first need to think about the specific goal. So I'm going to kind of tackle this question thinking about muscle building or hypertrophy as the main goal and go over a few points that you want to focus on. The first thing to think about, especially for training for hypertrophy, is choosing movements or exercises that you can create more external stability with. So choosing movements that actually you're using machines with, you're using cables, maybe you're using a chest support, that's going to allow you to focus in more on the target tissue and the target muscle that you're trying to work versus focusing on coordination and stability and balance. The next thing to think about is, are you setting up the movement or setting up your position within the exercise that you're doing so that you can get the most out of it, right? So everybody's structure and anatomy is different, whether you're doing a squat, whether it's a machine squat or a split squat, you need to make sure that you're setting yourself up to perform that movement properly and with proper technique. So taking some time beforehand to go through the motions, not just picking up the weight right away, but going through the motion and making sure that you are in a good position to get as much output from the muscles that you're trying to train. When we're trying to build a balanced workout, another thing to think about is making sure that you're choosing exercises where you're training the muscle through its full range of motion. So I like to think about this as picking movements where you're training both the stretchers and the squeezers. So all of that means is you're choosing movements where the stretch part of the movement is the hardest. So things like RDLs, squats, it's going to be hardest at the bottom of the movement when your muscles are being stretched. And that is referred to as more of a lengthened position or a lengthened movement that we're choosing. Versus the squeezers, those are going to be more of those exercises that focus on the contraction. So really squeezing that muscle. So you can think glute bridges, right, where you're squeezing your glutes at the top, or you're doing a bicep curl and you're squeezing at the top there. Those are gonna be really those movements that are focused on the squeezers. Something else to think about is making sure that you're picking exercises and movements that work for you and your structure. So there are no must-do movements or movements that you have to absolutely incorporate in your program. You don't have to barbell back squat. You don't have to deadlift. You need to make sure that you're choosing movements that are right for your specific goal. So don't make that mistake of just thinking that you have to do a certain exercise, especially if it doesn't feel good to you. The last point I'm gonna make with this is thinking about choosing movements that are actually not primarily focused on sensation or just the feeling of that burning. So this is a mistake that I made for a long time and that I see a lot of people make, is incorporating lots of movements into their program where it's really focused on that burning sensation. Like, where do I feel the burn? Where do I feel that sensation? And we know that when it comes to building muscle and hypertrophy training, you're actually going to be building the most muscle when you're using movements that are more in that lengthened or that stretched position. So if you're not incorporating movements that are going to be focused more on that lengthened or that stretched position, you're going to be missing out on a lot of potential when it comes to muscle growth. Let's take a leg extension versus a squat, for example. So if we're training our quads in a leg extension, that's going to be more so of an isolation movement, and you're really going to feel that sensation or that burn at the top of the movement when you're contracting your quads. Versus a squat, if you're doing a squat that is more focused on quad dominant, and even if you're getting a lot of knee flexion, you might not necessarily feel a huge amount of stimulus, especially in the bottom portion of that where it's the hardest, right? In that stretched position. But that doesn't mean that you're not getting a huge amount of stimulus there. Just thinking about that overall, and you can think about this with other movements as well, for your glutes, thinking about a glute bridge versus an RDL, the same kind of concept. So if you are just choosing exercises because of the sensation or the burn, you might be missing out on a lot of the potential and a lot of the actual area of growth that is gonna happen over the long term. Not that those exercises are bad or wrong or you shouldn't be doing them, but you don't wanna just pick exercises because you feel a burn, right? You need to make sure that you're following a proper, structured, smart program that incorporates both at specific times. When it comes to building a balanced workout, especially for hypertrophy training or building muscle, just make sure that you're incorporating different movements that will train the muscle through its entire range of motion. Make sure that you're choosing movements that create more external stability so that you can really focus on that target muscle tissue. Make sure you're choosing exercises that work for you and your structure, and exercises that you can progress over time. Women, we believe